Evening of the third day. Set and arithmetic.
Part 0. If we turn a blind eye to the fact that your opinion is entirely wrong, you're quite right. Part 1. I roused the slumbering Kunigisa awake, forced her to wash her face, and tied her blue hair up in a ponytail for her. Then, with her still half asleep, and me half carrying her, we headed to the dining hall, where everyone else from the mansion was already gathered. Round table, 2 empty seats. I helped Kunigisa to her seat, and then sat down next to her.
Thank you, Ichan.
As I settled in my chair, I took a quick look around the table at each person. Out of the 12 people present, the most eye-catching person, and I'm not sure whether or not this goes without saying, was none other than the mistress of the house, Iria Akagami. The concept of beauty is wholly subjective, varying from one person to the next, so to say Iria was beautiful would probably be pointless. If I say she was beautiful, that was simply something I personally felt and nothing more. Besides, Akari the maid was way more up my alley, as long as we're talking about personal preferences. No, I guess that's irrelevant. Seriously, to give something more objective, Iria Akagami was a classy woman. She wore her pretty black hair in a roll, coupled with an expensive-looking dress. She was actually somewhat mismatched, but her excessive classiness more than made up for it. She seemed to be around the same age as me, still in her 20s. But man, upbringing and lineage really do have their effects on people. Of course, there's always other factors as well, but those things are important for sure. That's always been the case. Iria Akagami, the black sheep granddaughter of the Akagami Foundation.
Well then, now that Kunigisa is here, shall we commence with the best part of the day?
She put her hands together like a little kid and said,
Thanks for the meal.
It seemed she was fairly jejune. Perhaps it was more that she wasn't a worldly person, but same difference. Incidentally, this island where people were largely free to do as they wished had a single rule.
We all eat dinner together.
It was a simple rule that shouldn't have been hard for anyone to follow, but indeed, quite a few men and women of talent had failed to do so and ended up leaving the island. There are a lot of similarities between a genius and a person with no common sense or decency. Iria sat with 2 maids on either side of her, Teriko and Ray, to the left, Akari and Hikari, to the right. There was no way to distinguish between Akari and Hikari, so I couldn't tell which one was which. Theoretically, one would have been able to tell them apart by their facial expressions and gestures and such. But for the non-observant type like myself, it was a challenge. Kunigisa seemed to be able to distinguish between the two, which was no mystery, since it was Tomo Kunigisa after all. But from what I'd heard, their mistress Iria couldn't. But the pair didn't seem to mind.
Now then, everybody, raise your glasses. Cheers!
She said in a sing-song voice, her glass raised high in the air. Everyone else, including myself, did likewise. But it bore mentioning that my glass and Kunigisa's were filled not with wine, but with juice. We were underaged. A number of dishes were set beautifully around the table. They were the proud masterpieces of genius chef Yayoi Sashirono. I'll start with the dish closest to me and go in that order. Crowned lamb roast, cappuccino-based sweet potato soup, foie gras terrine with truffle gnocchi, steamed blue mussels, eels simmered in green sauce à la berge, pickled herring, whale meat sashimi, sauce-covered ravioli, ostrich meat carpaccio, fruit salad, potato salad with egg, and finally, oil-sautéed mushrooms. Yep, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Probably because Yayoi had cooked to cater to the tastes of a dozen people, without rhyme or reason. Even after hearing the names, I had no idea. But that was neither here nor there. It's not like a name has that profound of an influence on the thing itself. I think. After all this, there was said to be dessert as well. If you thought about it, it was really a copious amount of food. And with Yayoi being the culinary maestro she was, the food was so delicious that I all but entirely neglected to watch my weight. Granted, Yayoi had apparently factored that into her cooking. After factoring in the nutritional value, it's still this amazing. She really is a genius, I muttered to myself, and not for the first time. Speaking of which, I had spoken to Yayoi a bit during lunch. When I had gone to the dining hall, she happened to be the only other person around, so I used the opportunity to inquire about the popular rumor about her. In other words, what was the secret power that allowed her to make any dish better than any other chef? That was the question. Upon hearing it, Yayoi gave a little amused laugh.
I'm afraid reality doesn't quite live up to the legends. Unlike Himena, I don't have any sort of wild superpower. Basically, it's just effort and discipline.
Really?
Well, I suppose I can imagine what might have started such a rumor. My senses of taste and smell are a bit, well, a lot stronger than the average person's.
She flicked out her tongue.
To give an anecdotal example, okay, like Helen Keller. She was blind, but they say she could distinguish between people just by their smell. I'm a little bit like that. My sense of smell isn't quite that amazing, but, for example...
She took my arm, and without warning, licked the back of my hand. I never dreamt of this development, and nearly let out a yelp, but somehow managed to suppress it. With her tongue still out, she gave me an Einsteinish grin.
You've got type AB blood, don't you?
She said.
Negative, right?
It occurred to me that she was right. When I applied for my passport, a public health doctor told me,
You have an extremely rare blood type.
So Yayoi was right for sure. But... you can really tell all that just by licking my skin?
Well, by licking your sweat, to be specific. My tongue can distinguish between approximately 20,000 flavors over 20 levels of intensity. My sense of smell is probably around half that good, I suppose.
She tilted her head thoughtfully. It was a cute mannerism.
I'm not smart like Sonoyama. I'm terrible at art, unlike Yabuki. I'm not particularly skilled with machines like Kunagisa. I certainly don't have psychic abilities like Himena. And there's not much else I'm any good at. But I've had just this one strength since I was a kid. I figured becoming a chef was the only way of taking advantage of it.
Perfect taste, it was apparently called. It's like the taste version of perfect pitch, except perfect taste isn't something you can acquire with training. In other words, Yayoi Sashirona was, to just come out and say it, one of the lucky few chosen by God. Among the highly skilled, there are two types of people, those who are chosen, and those who choose themselves. Those who have value, and those who create value. Of course, Yayoi had discipline and effort, but she was evidently a genius of the former type. So the path of a chef was not really something she had chosen. She had been born with this gift, and for that reason had gone on to study gastronomy, to travel to the West, and to polish her inborn talents even further. Flavor ultimately stems from an individual's ability to discern tastes. How well you can make a flavor your own and put it to use must be a major part of your skill as a chef. It made sense then that Yayoi excelled at it. Well, that's the chopped logic of it, but it doesn't mean much practically. In a nutshell, Yayoi's cooking was damn tasty. If you thought of the round table as a clock with Iria sitting at 12 o'clock, then Yayoi Sashirona was at 3 o'clock, next to Akari, or Hikari. At 4 o'clock was Shinya Sakaki. As you would expect from the man who had long been employed as Kanami's caretaker, he looked not the least bit intimidated, and was rather stately looking. Next to him sat Kanami Ibuki at the 5 o'clock position. Behind her was her wheelchair, which she must have used to come to the dining room. She didn't seem to be in a particularly bad mood, but she didn't look very cheerful either. At 6 o'clock was Tomo Kunigisa. This meant she was sitting directly across from the mistress of the house, Iria Akagami. That was more than enough to make me nervous, but my feeling nervous didn't matter. To Kunigisa, the word nervous didn't even exist in the Japanese language. Then in lucky seat number 7 sat myself. To my left at 8 o'clock sat Akane Sonayama of the 7 Fools. She was completely immersed in devouring Yayoi's cuisine. She had much more of an appetite than you might expect. Of course, she was a human being before she was a scholar, whether or not she would admit it herself. And you can't live if you don't eat. But even disregarding that, she was a serious eater. Just watching her chow down was salubrious. It seemed to me that Yayoi couldn't have wished for more. Next to Akane at 9 o'clock sat the genius fortune teller, the one with ESP superpowers, Maki Himina. At some point she had apparently changed clothes and was adorned in a different fashion than in the morning. She wore a halter-neck striped shirt with a pale pink cardigan and sheep-printed cropped pants. Her hair was up in twin ponytails, possibly because she noticed me looking at her. She looked back at me with an unpleasant sneer and sank her teeth into some roast lamb. It was an expression that said,
I know everything, but I'm not saying anything.
And it made me wholly uncomfortable. It never ends. At 10 o'clock, punitively bearing the same jeans as Akari and Hikari, sat Teriko with her black-rimmed glasses. She was completely silent and mostly expressionless, and depositing the food in her mouth as though she were getting rid of it. You had to wonder if her sense of taste was entirely absent for her to be able to eat these dishes without any sort of reaction. At 11 o'clock was Rei Honda, the head maid and Iria's right hand. In contrast to the overall juvenile appearance of the 3 sisters, of whom she was the direct superior, Rei was the very picture of a grown-up, brisk-mannered career woman. I hadn't heard her talk much, but she seemed to be as strict as she looked, and I had heard the corroborating sob stories of Hikari on a few occasions. So there you have it. A neat dozen. Lucky number. With such a lineup? Nonsense. What did it even mean? I obviously didn't belong here. I couldn't be more out of place. Then again, in my 19 years, there had never been a place where I did belong. Not Kobe, not Houston, not Kyoto, certainly not this island. In this wide world, there's only one me. Fine. I like solitude. I'm not bluffing. or even if I am.
Oh, by the way, if I can change the subject,
Iria said, bringing the conversation that had been unfolding to an immediate halt. The power to direct the table talk lay in Iria's hands alone. It was a selfish privilege befitting an upper-crust girl. She continued, raising her voice.
It seems there are already rumors floating around, so I'll go ahead and make the announcement. This is about the next guest. The latest genius to grace this house.
All eyes were on Iria. Well, all except for Kunigisa, who continued to gobble down the whale meat. To deliberately try and capture her attention was quite a difficult task.
I'd like to emphasize that our new guest is the possessor of such extraordinary, glorious talent that it even bears comparison to you all. I'd like very much to welcome this person, so please cooperate, all of you.
We reacted in our own ways. The part about bearing comparison seemed to have an effect. With everyone checking each other, only the very ordinary Shinya dared speak up. Question. Just who is this? I don't really know a whole lot, just from the rumors I've heard, but it seems this person is a real jack of all trades.
You could say that. We've only met once before, but yes, once was enough. This person is my hero.
She gazed up with an evident longing.
A truly heroic being to me. Like a master detective in a mystery novel, or a monster in a kaiju movie.
Kaiju? I could feel my eyebrows rise of their own accord. Iria had just dropped a reference to monster movies. But was that really an accurate description? That wasn't the kind of vocabulary you typically use to describe a human being. And when you did, it definitely didn't sound like a compliment. Well, you seem to think the world of this person. My expectations are up. So, a versatile genius. Does that include painting?
I've never seen it, but I wouldn't be surprised. I imagine something as simple as painting a picture shouldn't be a challenge.
As you would expect, this seemed to have wounded Kanami's pride. She looked a little bit, by which I mean ridiculously, miffed.
Might we possibly be graced with the name of this superior specimen, Iria?
She asked in a prickly tone. I had thought this in the morning as well, but Kanami really was proud. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not strictly a good thing either. Far be it for me to cast aspersions about the way Kanami chose to live, but to say the least, I knew I could never live like that. Iria, whose expression suggested that she didn't understand why Kanami was so mad, and in reality, that probably was the case, answered plainly,
Aikawa.
An anodyne reply. At that point, Kanami seemed like the stupid one.
Owing to an extremely busy schedule, Aikawa will only be staying here for 3 days. But everyone, please be friendly. Aikawa is a big deal to me. You could even call it love.
Iria's cheeks turned bright red. These childish antics further diffused the tension. She innately had that sort of air about her where she could make any demand, however bossy, and be forgiven for it. Probably her lineage to blame again. Even so, Aikawa, huh? I had never heard the name, ignorant as I was. I looked over at Kunigisa to see her reaction, but if she did know, she decided to go on eating. The girl was always this way about things that didn't interest her. More incorrigible than a child, and harder to handle than an animal. Well, then again, at least she was staying seated.
Ah, I'm so looking forward to it.
Iria said, in a daze.
To think, Ayakawa is visiting this island again. I'm glad I didn't give up and kept trying. It's like a dream. Oh, no, what if it really is a dream?
Judging from her state, she must have been pretty head over heels for this Ayakawa guy. It was like she was talking about the man she had been in love with for years and years, as though to speak his name were an act of worship.
Ah, by the by, Tomo?
She said, turning the conversation towards Kunigisa.
You were going to leave before then, isn't that right? Oh, yep.
The girl responded, not bothering to stop with the chopsticks in her hands. Expecting good table manners from Kunigisa was a lost cause, given that she was holding one chopstick in each hand.
Yep, 4 more days. That's really too bad. It's such a great opportunity. I'd really like you to meet Ayakawa. There's really no way? Afraid not. I live in a domain where once you've planned something, you can't change it. They even call me the living timetable. Ichan too, of course.
Don't drag me into this, I thought. Coming to this island was never part of my schedule in the first place. Iria nodded with a truly disappointed look on her face. Then, looking at Kunigisa solicitously, the mistress of the mansion asked,
Is that so? Could it be that you're not having a good time here? It doesn't seem like you've left your room much. I live in a domain where people don't leave their rooms much. But no, I'm having fun. Lots of fun. I can have fun anywhere, anytime, all the way.
Her words made me stiffen a bit. There was no exaggeration in what she said. For someone who's completely immersed in her own world, there's never a time that isn't fun. And not being familiar with other emotions, how tragic it is to be having fun anywhere, anytime. I already knew this about her.
Ah, I see.
Iria shrugged.
But Tomo, meeting Ayakawa would be meaningful for you too. You're bound to find some inspiration.
Kaname broke into the conversation as if she'd been waiting for the perfect timing.
Being influenced by another person is proof of one's own mediocrity, of one's incompetence. How ridiculous. I don't know what kind of person this Ayakawa is, but I sincerely doubt there'd be any point. No. Is that a fact?
Playing devil's advocate with Kaname was the obvious choice. Akane Sonayama.
I've spent more than 5 years surrounded by the finest minds in the world, and I know for a fact that without the experience, I wouldn't be where I am today. You can better yourself just by spending time with brilliant people. The ER3? How stupid. That's nothing but stupid. Why would anyone ever want to bind themselves to such an organization? I don't consider myself bound. We behave quite freely and help hone one another's skills. Freely? Don't just throw that word around. An organization with no restrictions isn't an organization at all. In the end, even you are no more than a member of a hierarchy, isn't that right? What a crock. I've been here on this island with you for a while now, but I certainly don't feel as if I've become any more refined. If anything, my worth is decreasing.
They glared at each other. To act this way in front of a whole group of people, they really were immature. I was a bit appalled. The maids fretted and made to mediate, but Iria had a look of pure delight on her face, so they refrained from stepping in. This kind of situation wasn't really my cup of tea. Meanwhile, Yayoi looked fairly indifferent as well. Maki looked entirely uninterested, and Shinya seemed to be writing the whole dispute off as an everyday occurrence. Wow, so many people, and no one bothered to intercede. Actually, there was someone. One more person.
In the end, human beings are a species that lives in groups, Ibuki. People such as yourself who purport to rely on nothing but lean heavily on a sense of entitlement all ought to rethink their lifestyle, if you ask me. Doesn't that simply mean, in the end, that you can't function without being surrounded by other people? Humans aren't migratory fish, you know. And I don't feel entitled. I'm just not self-deprecating. I live honestly and assess things as they really are. I wonder. I wonder? Ah, that again. You think you look clever by taking an ambiguous stance without ever clearly stating your opinion. Yeah, have it your way. How so very clever. I wonder, she says. This is just a little hard to listen to.
A voice. It was Kunagisa. She pouted her lips out like a sulky kid and looked at Kanami.
It's a little grating on my ears, Kanami, Akane.
All at once, everyone looked aghast. Nobody had expected Kunagisa, of all people, to say such a thing. I had had quite a few experiences with her in the past, so it wasn't beyond imaginable. She, Tomo Kunagisa, hated watching people fight quite a bit. Considering her usual happy-go-lucky attitude, it might have been a little unexpected, but it did make some sense. She was a fun-loving girl, which meant she didn't like situations that weren't fun. The logic was as simple as that.
I'm sorry. I went too far.
Somewhat surprisingly, it was Kanami who apologized first. In turn, Akane, as a prominent woman of respectable status, couldn't help but acknowledge it too.
I was wrong, too,
she said, awkwardly avoiding eye contact. They both hung their heads. Though the atmosphere was still distinctly awkward, at least the fiasco seemed to be over. Until Maki ruined it completely.
This is gonna get worse before it gets better.
With an audacious grin, she muttered those words in an icy voice that carried. Just what was this fortune teller trying to butt in with now that things had finally settled down? Meanwhile, Iria's eyes were twinkling with excitement.
Is that a prophecy?
She asked.
What do you mean it's going to get worse before it gets better? This is so fascinating. Will you tell us? I won't. I'm not saying anything. Yeah.
Saying this, Maki Himina cast a sideways glance in Kunagisa's direction.
I'm not quite so arrogant as to try to influence the world.
What's that supposed to mean? I protested without thinking. As for Kunagisa, she had already turned her full attention back to nutritional intake. It was as if she merely found the exchange too noisy. Maki, what do you mean by that? I demanded.
There's no meaning. Just like there's no meaning in your actions. You know you're... Wow. So you're the kind of guy who will get angry for the sake of a complete stranger? That's not very good. It's not bad per se, but it's not good. Oh my, and why is that?
Iria said, stepping into our little exchange. Or rather, maybe I was the one on the sideline.
I think it's wonderful to be able to get angry on behalf of a stranger. That's not so common in the world nowadays. You see, people who marshal their emotions for the sake of others are the same ones who blame things on others when something goes wrong.
Maki explained, then told me,
I truly despise people like you.
It had to be the first time in quite a while that someone had spoken that harshly, right to my face. Slowly, she brought her gaze to meet my eyes.
You just let yourself get carried along by other people. You're the type of person who ignores traffic lights just because everyone else is doing it. You're an abominably half-hearted human being. They say, harmonize without agreeing, but in your case, young man, it's like you're agreeing without harmonizing. I won't say that's bad. I won't say anything as to that. Having agency doesn't necessarily lead to individual worth. A train that runs along a track is better than a train that doesn't. So I won't say anything as to that. But I hate people like you. I despise them. People like you always blame things on others and never take responsibility.
Just carried along with the flow. To be sure, that is how I lived. However, what business? I hated it. Having met Kunigisa, I was thoroughly repulsed by it. What business does Maki Himina have to be telling me that?
Oh, are you angry? Gee, your boiling point's a lot lower than I expected. Are you the type who has mood swings all the time?
For goodness sake, for Christ's sake, for fucking Christ's sake, for God's sake, you...
Forget it, I-chan.
Kunigisa yanked on my sleeve.
It's not worth getting angry about.
Tomo Kunigisa. Understood. I felt a chill go through my body. The power drained from it. I didn't feel so much deflated as exhausted. I'd nearly risen, but slumped back in my chair.
Sorry. I was just kidding. Okay?
Maki said to Kunigisa, with a terribly sweet smile. And so, dinner that day was a bit of a disaster. Of course, the 2 days prior hadn't exactly gone off without a hitch either. But something about this jack-of-all-trades had wrought havoc. This Aikawa's coming to visit the island was becoming something to dread. Granted, I wouldn't be there when it happened, so I didn't really have much to do with it. Nevertheless, I had no idea why Maki was digging into me so much. Certainly, I hadn't made a great first impression on her, but that couldn't have been the only cause. It was obvious that she disliked me. But that wasn't reason enough to be harping on me so aggressively. The opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. If she just didn't like me, she wouldn't go so far out of her way to pick on me. Why, out of this entire group of brilliant people, would Maki Himina specifically target a boring, ordinary person like me? We didn't have anything to do with each other. It was strange. Brooding over the matter, I didn't reflect for a moment on Maki's prophecy that things would get worse before they got better. If I had given it some thought, it's not likely that anything would have gone differently. But looking back, I can't help but regret that a little. I guess it couldn't be helped. After all, the only person on the island who could regret things before they happened was Maki.